and I'd love to bring in Brian Walker. So, Brian, welcome.
Good morning. Great to see you, Mo.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to join you this morning.
Excited to have you on, Brian, today. So, welcome. So, Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself and dig into the cocktail of the day.
Well, I my day job is strategic advisory for software companies, both inside commerce and outside. That's really what we're doing with Strategy M. Cocktails in Commerce is really our kind of opportunity to kind of project a point of view, bring other points of view to the enterprise commerce technology ecosystem, put it that way. So both software and services providers. We tend to focus primarily on that community, but naturally brands and retailers also subscribe. And we write about kind of an industry point of view, and try to be provocative, try to kind of get inside baseball, if you will. And we pair it with cocktails and mocktails, I should say. And I'm an enthusiast. I've been an enthusiast for a long time, and wanted to give people a reason to engage with the content, whether they were feeling exhausted or not by work and their industry and all the challenges everyone's wrestling with and how hard everyone's hustling. I wanted to make sure I offered them something, and I try to share history, background, techniques, and of course recipes when I write about the cocktails. And of course, when we have a podcast, we start with a cocktail or a mocktail. Love for you guys to check out the pod or the newsletter. And I think on the slide, if that can come up, I don't know, is that being shown right now? There's a little QR code. It looks pretty tiny there, but if you snap it right now, that'll take you to Cocktails in Commerce.
Perfect.
You asked Mo for a cocktail of the day. So I decided to kind of play it both ways here, cocktail and mocktail. Cocktail of the day, of course, an iconic, foundational, in a sense, MVP of cocktailing and mixology, the Negroni. One of the earliest cocktails that combined bitters with vermouth and a spirit, kind of grew out of a classic Italian cocktail called a Milano Torino, later renamed an Americano because the Americans liked it so much. When they were either stationed there or traveling there, post World War II and so on. The Fogroni is actually what I'm having this morning. Naturally, it's very early in the morning here. It wouldn't be very prudent of me to be sipping on alcohol. So I've mixed a really nice mocktail. I've got a non-alcoholic vermouth called Roots that is actually from Greece. It's very good. And then a bitter, this comes from Portland, Oregon, Wilderton. That kind of subs in for the Campari. And then I do kind of do it like an Americano in some ways with some Topo Chico or mineral water, but you could sub in a non-alcoholic gin. There's a really good one from a company called Free Spirits that I would recommend if you want to experiment with that.
Fantastic. Well, the only thing is, I'm sorry I don't have one of those on my desk at the moment.
It is very refreshing. Cheers.
Excellent. Well, cheers. So with that, let's dive in and into the fireside chat. So obviously, it's AI big year this year, and of course last year. And if you look at the adoption curve, it's just off the charts in terms of the consumer, which means it's going to work its way into enterprises and everything that we do. So how do you think about the commerce technology landscape as it applies to commerce? You've been in the commerce world for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And how do you think AI will shape it?
It's getting close to 30, if you can believe it now. I think it's important to recognize that we've been infusing, to use a mixology term, we've been infusing AI in commerce really in many ways since the beginning of e-commerce, or certainly the very early days. When I was back at eddiebauer.com launching that, our first interactive media project was actually CD-ROMs before we went to AOL and then finally launched a website. But we had a guy named Tim. Tim wrote a personalization algorithm and housed it on a server under his desk in our corporate headquarters in Redmond, Washington. And we were already experimenting with AI very, very, very early. And of course, Amazon I later worked at Amazon. Clearly, AI was everywhere in the early days still, although it was a different chapter of AI than we're in today. Clearly, it was focused on reinforcement learning, machine learning, collaborative filtering. Um, and if we kind of fast forward to really only a few years ago, you could almost say that AI had started to get some pushback, right? Some backlash, if you will. Some of that was due to certain software vendors overselling, many of which had named their AI over after historical or fictional characters like Einstein or Watson, right? Um, and then if we fast forward to kind of where we are today with this next generation of AI, with large language models and generative I would say it's still very early days to really recognize the impact that it's going to have. Many of the projects that we're hearing about or product launches we're hearing about are still largely what I would describe as pilots, alpha, or beta projects. Although I think the impact of many of those will be felt very soon.
Okay, well, definitely there seems to be a lot of disruption, and there'll be some fundamental realignment in terms of kind of what people are gonna do. So, what are those use cases you're seeing? You touched upon like people are doing pilots and stuff. So, what are they doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think short term, when we think about kind of the both the sort of technical maturity and kind of the opportunity to kind of attack some of the early use cases, clearly product content is an area that people are already probably using a
Yeah,
sidebar of
yeah,
a open AI or something related similar to that. And certainly we're seeing more and more kind of integration into the tools, whether it's catalog tools or other copywriting tools that they're using, and it's impacting SEO, enriching product catalogs, kind of streamlining workflow, helping copywriters move faster. Imagery is still kind of nascent, but I do expect we'll see some proliferation on leveraging a product image, for example, and replicating it or
yeah,
taking an on-model lifestyle type photography and creating many different versions of it, potentially so that you can target different customer segments, but leverage the same kind of hero shot. Naturally, there'll be some kind of native visual content, in the short term. Attribute extraction, that's another use case we're seeing, kind of all over the board. Again, that's impacting, both sort of the catalog front, but also search and personalization tools. If I'm honest, it's a bit of a mess right now. There's so many tools kind of adding attribute extraction. It's like you've kind of got some competing, where's the version of truth? How do we reconcile this? How do we manage it and monitor it? Customer service, naturally,
yeah,
continuation of the effort to streamline, lower costs, defer calls. We see, of course, chat-based interactions improving. Um, and certainly automation also on the back end with email and SMS and so on. So that's clearly one. Marketing ideation and maybe efficiency again around copywriting, right? So
mhm,
similar to what I was describing with the product catalog, many of these are being kind of plugged into existing tools like marketing automation and email tools. They're really extensions of OpenAI and Amazon and so on and so on today. But they're also using Copilot and all these other things to try to do that, and into varying degrees of effectiveness. But as a collaboration partner, I think we've all experienced how AI can be really valuable, and I think
yeah,
marketers are certainly taking advantage of that. And then finally, kind of connected to what you're doing at Pipe 17, Mo, I think order orchestration, we're seeing use cases really starting to play out in smarter order logic, routing, stock visibility,
yeah,
optimization. Again, kind of varying stages of
mm,
maturity around some of those capabilities, but kind of taking traditional kind of rules-based order management and
yeah.
starting to add more automation and optimization on top of that.
Okay,
Now I can keep
but
going and talk about mid and long term and futuristic, but that's kind of the short term list.
just yeah, and
Yeah.
that kind of it kind of echoes what we're seeing as well, which is kind of, marketing and sales are always, whenever there's new technology in any industry, they're always the first one to pick it up, the creative folks. And then you start to see kind of the systems and the technologies work their way to the back office functions, and kind of that's already happening in various areas. The
Yeah.
interesting thing is, when on episode 1 we talked about this concept of, AI will change the way people buy, it'll change the way people sell, vendors sell, etc. And you and I chatted about kind of conversational and kind of agentic commerce and stuff. Love to kind of get your take on what do you see in that, and what do you think today, and what do you see in it going forward? Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, agentic, there's clearly a lot of kind of focus on that and interest in it, and it is very interesting. I would say I tend to be, less enthusiastic about agentic, but that might just be some personal bias. I've been asking myself that a lot recently. Is it just because I don't think I like it,
Yeah.
or why
Yeah.
I'm less keen on it? And I think the early kind of evolution, which of course it's hard to judge the overall impact based on sort of the early trials, it's not really that compelling. But I do see that there's clearly an opportunity there. I am more bullish on what I would describe as conversational commerce. But keep in mind, this isn't just chat, in my opinion. I think it's
Okay.
actually an opportunity to dramatically evolve kind of the experience the customers have as they engage with brands, with retailers, and certainly
Yeah.
marketplaces. Yeah, it could certainly, the interaction could be through typing and text, but it could also clearly be through voice. And I think some of the desktop and even television might have a more dramatic impact, kind of as we move there, creating a more immersive, larger format type experience that is very conversational, very visual, and potentially kind of immersive, and of course hyper personalized, right? And
Yeah.
in a sense, you think about the best in-store experience that you have, it's when you're working with someone who's got a great personality, they know their stock, they know their inventory, and they can help you, kind of hone in on whether it's you're buying a gift or something for yourself, kind of hone in on opportunities, right? And adjacencies and concepts, and based on use cases and things that you're trying to do. Use cases, maybe the wrong word, but my desires and tasks that I'm trying to fulfill. And I think conversational experiences, it's still very early. I could be wrong. It's hard to forecast how these things evolve, but I do think it could dramatically change how we think about websites and digital experiences in the not too distant future.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we spend a lot of time thinking about this because obviously we're kind of banging the back end of the commerce
Yeah.
world, and we kind of think about some of the buying decisions that I sometimes makes, like buying a new fridge, right? And I go to Chat GPT and I say, like, what are the top 5 fridges and which one have the best reviews and stuff. So you can imagine the chat interface certainly becoming a mechanism to influence the buyer,
Yeah,
right? And that's something that's
absolutely.
super super interesting as it comes up. Um, Kind of, you touched upon this a little bit, but as you have demand coming across multiple channels, I mean, we see more and more channels. You mentioned, TV, and when I'm watching TV and we use YouTube TV, I see all of these hyper personalized ads. I mean, I know they're for me and not the guy next door come through. So as you start to get demand across more and more channel, how are retailers and brands thinking about this? Because I know you talked to a whole bunch of these folks, and how they thinking about kind of making this work for them as a business.
Yeah, I'm doing research on this right now for something I'm writing and working on. So I've had an opportunity to be thinking about this and talking to people about it recently. And if you subscribe, you'll get an opportunity to see what we produce. I don't want to say when exactly. The holidays and a very busy work schedule, but I've been working on this concept. And to sum it up, you might describe it as kind of peak website. We've reached a point where we may never see the brands and retailers' website be as important in the future as it was yesterday. I know that's kind of a
Okay.
provocative idea, but the concept, kind of relates to this fragmentation of demand. Right now,
Yeah.
social commerce, marketplaces, agentic, all these different kinds of things happening, and an increasing kind of federation of demand landscape, especially when you think about brands. I think this is absolutely true. And for retailers, it might be a little bit of a different kind of concept, how they think about aggregating that demand into their environment or publishing what they have curated more effectively into the marketplace.
Yeah.
But the back end, it has to be able to respond. You have to have real-time inventory visibility. You have to have the ability to orchestrate across all these different demand kind of channels. Marketing itself will probably become much more interactive as well. I may be purchasing through my marketing in the very near future. It's kind of a tired paradigm that I have to click through to a website and go through that process. You can imagine I'm just hitting buy in my email and it's done. It's a lot more streamlined potentially. I know I'm kind of trying to kind of summarize here, but you get the idea. And so on the back end, clearly the opportunity there for brands and retailers is to be thinking forward and thinking about how they're going to aggregate across all these different channels, but have the control, right, to orchestrate the order against a much more complex fulfillment environment. And we haven't talked about some of the other ways AI could potentially be impacting retailers and brands, but one would be obviously supply chain automation and really collapsing how you think about the design and the merchandise that you're selling, becoming increasingly close to almost on demand, right? Almost on demand. We already see this model, of course, with Shine and to some degree Zara as the early innovators in apparel, taking advantage of this. And many brands and retailers have to think about how to respond, leverage the marketing channel, and then more effectively pair that with a back end that can facilitate that kind of real time, kind of order fulfillment, potentially coming from offshore, et cetera. So between stores, warehouses, 3PL, drop ship, marketplace, and offshore, that's a lot to handle on the back end too. So you've got to have a solution in the middle that can manage and orchestrate across that. And that's why, I'm pretty bullish about this domain because I think it's really a critical. While we've kind of commoditized the commerce experience and the platforms kind of where they're at today, and in some degrees kind of reached the final stages of optimization, we talked about how that may change, but what won't change is the increasing complexity and dynamism of the back end.
No, and that's super interesting. And with that segue, I wanted to thank Brian on behalf of all of us. Thank you for sharing your recipes. It will be shared also on the event follow-up, and I look forward to enjoying it maybe in the evening. But with that, thank you very much, Brian, on behalf of all of us.